Chapter 5. Plenty of people changed their names: actors, writers, revolutionaries, transvestites. In history class, Gogol has learned that European immigrants had their names changed at Ellis Island, that slaves renamed themselves once they were emancipated. Even though Gogol doesn't know it, even Nikolai Gogol renamed himself, simplifying his surname at the age of 22 from Gogol-Yanovsky to Gogol upon publication in the Literary Gazette. He had also published under the name Yanov and once signed his work OOOO in honor of the 4 O's in his full name. One day in the summer of 1986, in the frantic weeks before moving away from his family, before his freshman year at Yale is about to begin, Gogol Ganguly does the same. He rides the commuter rail into Boston, switching to the Green Line at North Station, getting out at Lechmere. The area is somewhat familiar. He has been to Lechmere countless times with his family to buy new televisions and vacuum cleaners, and he has been to the Museum of Science on field trips from school. But he has never been to this neighborhood on his own, and in spite of the directions he has written on a sheet of paper, he gets briefly lost on his way to the Middlesex Probate and Family Court. He wears a blue Oxford shirt, khakis, a camel-colored corduroy blazer bought for his college interviews that is too warm for the sultry day. Knotted around his neck is his only tie, maroon with yellow stripes on the diagonal. By now Gogol is just shy of 6 feet tall, his body slender, his thick brown-black hair slightly in need of a cut. His face is lean, intelligent, suddenly handsome, the bones more prominent, the pale gold skin clean-shaven and clear. He has inherited Ashima's eyes, large, penetrating, with bold, elegant brows, and shares with Ashok the slight bump at the very tip of his nose. The courthouse is an imposing, old, pillared brick building occupying a full city block, but the entrance is off to the side, down a set of steps. Inside, Gogol empties his pockets and steps through a metal detector, as if he were at an airport about to embark on a journey. He is soothed by the chill of the air conditioning, by the beautifully carved plaster ceiling, by the voices that echo pleasantly in the marbled interior. He had pictured a setting far less grand, and yet this is a place, he gathers, that people come to seek divorces, dispute wills. A man at the information booth tells him to wait upstairs, in an area filled with round tables where people sit eating their lunches. Gogol sits impatiently, one long leg jiggling up and down. He has forgotten to bring a book to read, and so he picks up a discarded section of the Globe, skimming an article in the art section about Andrew Wyatt's Helga paintings. Eventually, he begins to practice his new signature in the margins of the paper. He tries it in various styles, his hand unaccustomed to the new angles of the N, the dotting of the two I's. He wonders how many times he has written his old name, at the tops of how many tests and quizzes, how many homework assignments, how many yearbook inscriptions to friends. How many times does a person write his name in a lifetime? 1,000,000? 2,000,000? The idea to change his name had first occurred to him a few months ago. He was sitting in the waiting room of his dentist, flipping through an issue of Reader's Digest. He had been turning the pages at random until he came to an article that caused him to stop. The article was called Second Baptisms. "Can you identify the following famous people?" was written beneath the headline. A list of names followed, and at the bottom of the page, printed in tiny letters upside down, the famous personalities they corresponded to. The only one he guessed correctly was Robert Zimmerman, Bob Dylan's real name. He had no idea that Molière had been born John Baptiste Poquelin, and that Leon Trotsky was born Lev Davidovich Bronstein, that Gerald Ford's name was Leslie Lynch King, Jr., and that Engelbert Humperdinck's was Arnold George Dorsey. They had all renamed themselves, the article said, adding that it was a right belonging to every American citizen. He read that tens of thousands of Americans had their names changed each year. All it took was a legal petition, the article had said, and suddenly he envisioned Gogol added to the list of names, Nickel printed in tiny letters upside down. That night at the dinner table, he brought it up with his parents. It was one thing for Gogol to be the name penned in calligraphy on his high school diploma and printed below his picture in the yearbook he had begun. It was one thing, even, for it to be typed on his applications to 5 Ivy League colleges, as well as to Stanford and Berkeley. But engraved 4 years from now on a Bachelor of Arts degree, written at the top of a resume, centered on a business card, it would be the name his parents picked out for him, he assured them, the good name they had chosen for him when he was 5. "What's done is done," his father had said. "It will be a hassle. Gogol has, in effect, become your good name." "It's too complicated now," his mother said, agreeing. "You're too old." "I'm not," he persisted. "I don't get it. Why did you have to give me a pet name in the first place? What's the point?" "It's our way, Gogol," his mother maintained. "It's what Bengalis do." "But it's not even a Bengali name." He told his parents what he had learned in Mr. Lawson's class about Gogol's lifelong unhappiness, his mental instability, about how he had starved himself to death. "Did you know all this stuff about him?" he asked. You forgot to mention that he was also a genius, his father said. I don't get it. How could you guys name me after someone so strange? No one takes me seriously, Gogol said. Who? Who does not take you seriously? His father wanted to know, lifting his fingers from his plate, looking up at him. People, he said, lying to his parents. For his father had a point. The only person who didn't take Gogol seriously, the only person who tormented him, the only person chronically aware of and afflicted by the embarrassment of his name, the only person who constantly questioned it and wished it were otherwise, was Gogol. And yet he had continued, saying that they should be glad that his official name would be Bengali, not Russian. I don't know, Gogol, his mother had said, shaking her head. I really don't know. She got up to clear the dishes. Sonia slinked away up to her room. Gogol remained at the table with his father. They sat together, listening to his mother scraping the plates, the water running in the sink. Then change it, his father said simply, quietly, after a while. Really? In America, anything is possible. Do as you wish. And so he had obtained a Commonwealth of Massachusetts change of name form to submit along with a certified copy of his birth certificate and a check to the Middlesex Probate and Family Court. He had brought the form to his father, who had glanced at it only briefly before signing his consent, with the same resignation with which he signed a check or a credit card receipt, his eyebrows slightly raised over his glasses, inwardly calculating the loss. He had filled out the rest of the form in his room late at night when his family was asleep. The application consisted of a single side of a cream-colored sheet, and yet it had taken him longer to fill out than his applications for college. On the first line he filled out the name he wished to be changed, and his place and date of birth. He wrote in the new name he wished to adopt, then signed the form with his old signature. Only one part of the form had given him pause. In approximately 3 lines, he was asked to provide a reason for seeking the change. For nearly an hour he had sat there, wondering what to write. He had left it blank in the end. At the appointed time his case is called. He enters a room and sits on the empty wooden bench at the back. The judge, a middle-aged, heavy-set black woman wearing half-moon glasses, sits opposite on a dais. The clerk, a thin young woman with bobbed hair, asks for his application, reviewing it before handing it to the judge. There is nothing decorating the room apart from the Massachusetts state and American flags and an oil portrait of a judge. Gogol Ganguly, the clerk says, motioning for Gogol to approach the dais, and as eager as he is to go through with it, he is aware, with a twinge of sadness, that this is the last time in his life he will hear that name uttered in an official context. In spite of his parents' sanction, he feels that he is overstepping them, correcting a mistake they have made. "What is the reason you wish to change your name, Mr. Ganguly?" the judge asks. The question catches him off guard, and for several seconds he has no idea what to say. "Personal reasons," he says eventually. The judge looks at him, leaning forward, her chin cupped in her hand. "Would you care to be more specific?" At first he says nothing, unprepared to give any further explanation. He wonders whether to tell the judge the whole convoluted story about his great-grandmother's letter that never made it to Cambridge, and about pet names and good names, about what had happened on the first day of kindergarten. But instead, he takes a deep breath and tells the people in the courtroom what he has never dared to admit to his parents. "I hate the name Gogol," he says. "I've always hated it." "Very well," the judge says, stamping and signing the form, then returning it to the clerk. He is told that notice of the new name must be given to all other agencies, that it's his responsibility to notify the registry of motor vehicles, banks, schools. He orders 3 certified copies of the name change decree, 2 for himself and 1 for his parents to keep in the safe deposit box. No one accompanies him on this legal rite of passage, and when he steps out of the room, no one is waiting to commemorate the moment with flowers and Polaroid snapshots and balloons. In fact, the procedure is entirely unmomentous, and when he looks at his watch he sees that from the time he had entered the courtroom, it had taken all of 10 minutes. He emerges into the muggy afternoon, perspiring, still partly convinced it is a dream. He takes the T across the river to Boston. He walks with his blazer clasped by a finger over his shoulder, across the common, through the public garden, over the bridges and along the curving paths that rim the lagoon. Thick clouds conceal the sky, which appears only here and there, like the small lakes on a map, and their air threatens rain. He wonders if this is how it feels for an obese person to become thin, for a prisoner to walk free. "I'm Nikhil," he wants to tell the people who are walking their dogs, pushing children in their strollers, throwing bread to the ducks. He wanders up Newbury Street as drops begin to fall. He dashes into Newbury Comics, buys himself London Calling and Talking Heads 77 with his birthday money, a cheap poster for his dorm room. He pockets an application for his student American Express card, grateful that his first credit card will not say Gogol in raised letters at the bottom. "I'm Nikhil," he is tempted to tell the attractive, nose-ringed cashier with dyed black hair and skin as pale as paper. The cashier hands him his change and looks past him to the next customer. But it doesn't matter. Instead, he thinks of how many more women he can now approach for the rest of his life with this same unobjectionable, uninteresting fact. Still, for the next 3 weeks, even though his new driver's license says Nikhil, even though he has sliced up the old one with his mother's sewing scissors, even though he has ripped out the pages in front of his favorite books in which he had written his name until now, there's a snag. Everyone he knows in the world still calls him Gogol. He is aware that his parents and his friends, their friends, and the children of their friends, and all of his own friends from high school will never call him anything but Gogol. He will remain Gogol during holidays and in summer. Gogol will revisit him on each of his birthdays. Everyone who comes to his going away to college party writes "Good luck Gogol" on the cards. It isn't until his first day in New Haven, after his father and teary mother and Sonia are headed back up 95 towards Boston, that he begins to introduce himself as Nikhil. The first people to call him by his new name are his suitmates, Brandon and Jonathan, both of whom had been notified by mail over the summer that his name is Gogol. Brandon, lanky and blond, grew up in Massachusetts, not far from Gogol, and went to an Andover. Jonathan, who is Korean and plays the cello, comes from LA. Is Gogol your first name or your last? Brandon wants to know. Normally that question agitates him, but today he has a new answer. Actually, that's my middle name, Gogol says, by way of explanation, sitting with them in the common room of their suite. Nikhil is my first name. It got left out for some reason. Jonathan nods in acceptance, distracted by the task of setting up his Cheerio components. Brandon nods too. Hey, Nikhil, Brandon says a while later, after they have arranged the furniture in the common room to their liking. Want to smoke a bowl? Since everything else is suddenly so new, going by a new name doesn't feel so terribly strange to Gogol. He lives in a new state, has a new telephone number. He eats his meals off a tray in Commons, shares a bathroom with a floor full of people, showers each morning in a stall. He sleeps in a new bed, which his mother had insisted on making before she left. He spends the days of orientation rushing around campus, back and forth along the intersecting flagstone path, past the clock tower and the turreted, crenellated buildings. He is too harried at first to sit on the grass in old campus as the other students do, perusing their course catalogues, playing frisbee, getting to know one another among the verdant grease-covered statues of robed, seated men. He makes a list of all the places he has to go, circling the buildings on his campus map. When he is alone in his room, he types out a written request on his Smith Corona, notifying the registrar's office of his name change, providing examples of his former and current signatures side by side. He gives these documents to a secretary, along with a copy of the change of name form. He tells his freshman counselor about his name change. He tells the person in charge of processing his student ID and his library card. He corrects the error in stealth, not bothering to explain to Jonathan and Brandon what he is so busy doing all day. And then suddenly it is over. After so much work, it is no work at all. By the time the upperclassmen arrive and classes begin, he has paved the way for a whole university to call him Nikhil. Students and professors and TAs and girls at parties. Nikhil registers for his first 4 classes: Intro to the History of Art, Medieval History, a semester of Spanish, Astronomy to fulfill his hard science requirement. At the last minute he registers for a drawing class in the evenings. He doesn't tell his parents about the drawing class, something they would consider frivolous at this stage of his life, in spite of the fact that his own grandfather was an artist. They are already distressed that he hasn't selected on a major and a profession. Like the rest of their Bengali friends, his parents expect him to be, if not an engineer, then a doctor, a lawyer, an economist, at the very least. These were the fields that brought them to America, his father repeatedly reminds him, the professions that have earned them security and respect. But now that he's Nikhil, it's easier to ignore his parents, to tune out their concerns and pleas. With relief, he types his name at the tops of his freshman papers. He reads the telephone messages his suitemates leave for Nikhil on assorted scraps in their rooms. He opens up a checking account, writes his new name into course books. "Miamu Nikhil," he says in his Spanish class. It is as Nikhil that first semester that he grows a goatee, starts smoking Camel Lights at parties, and while writing papers and before exams, discovers Brian Eno and Elvis Costello and Charlie Parker. It is as Nikhil that he takes Metro North into Manhattan one weekend with Jonathan and gets himself a fake ID that allows him to be served liquor in New Haven bars. It is as Nikhil that he loses his virginity at a party at Ezra Styles with a girl wearing a plaid woolen skirt and combat boots and mustard tights. By the time he wakes up, hungover, at 3 in the morning, she has vanished from the room, and he is unable to recall her name. There is only one complication. He doesn't feel like Nikhil. Not yet. Part of the problem is that people who know him as Nikhil have no idea that he used to be Gogol. They know him only in the present, not at all in the past. But after 18 years of Gogol, 2 months of Nikhil feels scant, inconsequential. At times, he feels as if he has cast himself in a play, acting the part of twins, indistinguishable to the naked eye, yet fundamentally different. At times, he still feels his old name painfully and without warning, the way his front tooth had unbearably throbbed in recent weeks after a filling, threatening for an instant to sever from his gums when he drank coffee or iced water. And once, when he was riding an elevator, he fears being discovered, having the whole charade somehow unravel, and in nightmares his files are exposed, his original name printed on the front page of the Yale Daily News. Once he signs his old name by mistake on a credit card slips at the college bookstore. Occasionally he has to hear Nikhil 3 times before he answers. Even more startling is when those who normally call him Gogol refer to him as Nikhil. For example, when his parents call on Saturday mornings, if Brandon or Jonathan happen to pick up the phone, they ask if Nikhil is there, though he has asked his parents to do precisely this. The fact of it troubles him, making him feel in that instant that he is not related to them, not their child. "Please come to our home with Nikhil one weekend," Ashima says to his roommates when she and Ashok visit campus during Parents' Weekend in October. The suite hastily cleared of liquor bottles and ashtrays, and Brandon's bong for the occasion. The substitution sounds wrong to Gogol, correct but off-key, the way it sounds when his parents speak English to him instead of Bengali. Stranger still is when one of his parents addresses him in front of his new friends as Nikhil directly. "Nikhil, show us the buildings where you have your classes," his father suggests. Later that evening, out to dinner with Jonathan at a restaurant in Chapel Street, Ashima slips, asking, "Gogol, have you decided yet what your major will be?" Though Jonathan, listening to something his father is saying, doesn't hear, Gogol feels helpless, annoyed yet unable to blame his mother, caught in the mess he has made. During his first semester, obediently but unwillingly, he goes home every other weekend after his last Friday class. He rides Amtrak to Boston and then switches to a commuter rail, his duffel bag stuffed with course books and dirty laundry. Somewhere along the 2.5-hour journey, Nikhil evaporates and Gogol claims him again. His father comes to the station to fetch him, always calling ahead to check whether the train is on time. Together they drive through the town, along the familiar tree-lined roads, his father asking after his studies. Between Friday night and Sunday afternoon, the laundry, thanks to his mother, gets done, but the course books are neglected. In spite of his intentions, Gogol finds himself capable of doing little at his parents' but eat and sleep. The desk in his room feels so small. He is distracted by the telephone ringing, by his parents and Sonia talking and moving through the house. He misses Sterling Library, where he studies every night after dinner, and the nocturnal schedule of which he is now a part. He misses being in his suite in Farnham, smoking one of Brandon's cigarettes, listening to music with Jonathan, learning how to tell the classical composers apart. At home he watches MTV with Sonia as she doctors her jeans, cutting inches off the bottoms and inserting zippers at the newly narrowed ankles. One weekend, the washing machine is occupied because Sonia is in the process of dyeing the vast majority of her clothing black. She is in high school now, taking Mr. Lawson's English class, going to the dances Gogol never went to himself, already going to parties at which both boys and girls are present. Her braces have come off her teeth, revealing a confident, frequent American smile. Her formerly shoulder-length hair has been chopped asymmetrically by one of her friends. Ashima lives in fear that Sonia will color a streak of it blonde, as Sonia has threatened on more than one occasion to do, and that she will have additional holes pierced in her earlobes at the mall. They argue violently about such things, Ashima crying, Sonia slamming doors. Some weekends, his parents are invited to parties, and they insist that both Gogol and Sonia go with them. The host or hostess shows him to a room where he can study alone while the party thunders below, but he always ends up watching television with Sonia and the other children, just as he has done all his life. "Amitin," he says once to his parents as they drive back from a party, a fact that makes no difference to them. One weekend, Gogol makes the mistake of referring to New Haven as home. "Sorry, I left it at home," he says, when his father asks if he remembered to buy the Yale decal his parents wanted to paste to the rear window of their car. Ashima is outraged by the remark, dwelling on it all day. "Only 3 months, and listen to you," she says, telling him that after 20 years in America, she still cannot bring herself to refer to Pemberton Road as home. But now it is his room at Yale where Gogol feels most comfortable. He likes its oldness, its persistent grace. He likes that so many students have occupied it before him. He likes the solidity of its plaster wall, its dark wooden floorboards, however battered and stained. He likes the dormer window he sees the first thing in the mornings when he opens his eyes and looking at Battle Chapel. He has fallen in love with the Gothic architecture of the campus, always astonished by the physical beauty that surrounds him, that roots him to his environs in a way he had never felt growing up on Pemberton Road. For his drawing class, in which he is required to make half a dozen sketches every week. He is inspired to draw the details of buildings, flying buttresses, pointed archways filled with flowing tracery, thick rounded doorways, squat columns of pale pink stone. In the spring semester, he takes an introductory class in architecture. He reads about how the pyramids and Greek temples and medieval cathedrals were built, studying the plans of churches and palaces in his textbook. He learns the endless terms, the vocabulary that classifies the details of ancient buildings, writing them on separate index cards and making illustrations on the back. Architrave, entablature, tympanum, voussoir. Together the words form another language he longs to know. He files these index cards in a shoebox, reviews them before the exam, memorizing far more terms than he needs to, keeping the box of cards even after the exam is done, adding to them in his spare time.